Okay, so good morning, everyone. Apologies, first of all, that we're a few minutes late, but I'm sure we will we'll get through things quickly, and we'll make up the 5 minutes we've lost at the beginning. So my name's Nick Ferguson, and I'm the coordinator of the HSboosyter project and also the CyberSTAND project. And this webinar is a collaboration between both projects, and then another project called STAN4CR. HSboosyter is funded by through the Horizon Europe program, while CyberSTAND and STAN4CR are funded through the Digital Europe program. But what do they have in common? They have in common standardization and encouraging and facilitating contributions to standardization priorities to different stakeholders. HSboosyter focuses more on projects, and CyberSTAND and STAN4CR focuses on getting people to contribute to the development of standards for the Cyber Resilience Act. And this is what we'll be talking about in today's webinar. So we have 4 speakers. We have Filipe Jones-Mourao from the European Commission, who'll be giving an overview on the status of the Cyber Resilience Act and basically where we stand. We'll be hearing from Lucia Lanfri from the CEN-CENELEC, who's part of the CyberSTAND and STAN4CR projects, who'll be giving information around the relevant working groups and the timelines with the work. And then we'll be hearing from Berit Adel, from Danish Standards, who's also involved in STAN4CR, and we'll be looking at the horizontal standards, which is one of the key priorities. And then we'll be hearing from Maria Rafael, who's one of the people who's benefited from the funding opportunities that CyberSTAND has, where we fund contributions to the Cyber Resilience Act. So with that, I'll hand over to Filipe. There'll be time at the very end for Q&A. Okay, we'll open the floor up. If you've got questions, you can pop them in the Q&A box or in the chat, and we'll see if, well, more in the Q&A box if possible, so that the speakers can see them coming in. Okay, with no further ado, I'll close my slide and hand over to you, Filipe. I think you're muted, Filipe.
All right. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me now. Nice to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. Happy to see CyberSTAND, but also the HSboosyter and STAN4CR kicking off so clearly and having a lot of reach outs. So we hope that this can be of interest to you. I've seen the list of participants. I recognize a few names, so I hope what I'm about to present is not too repetitive for you, but overall wanted to give a quick overview of the Cyber Resilience Act and the work that we've started to do on the standards. So the CRA, in a nutshell, it's basically the first time that the EU comes out with legislation covering the whole supply chain and asking products to be made secure. There was a delegated regulation under the Radio Equipment Directive that came out in 2022. It will enter into force over the course of this year, but it will essentially be replaced by the Cyber Resilience Act, which has a larger scope and more precise requirements. So the main elements of this legislation, as I say, are for the placing on the market of both hardware and software products. The obligations, as usual in the new legislative framework, they fall on manufacturers, but also distributors and importers of products into the EU market. One of the innovations of the CRA, as part of this sort of modern wave of product legislations, is that the essential requirements, they actually cover the whole life cycle of the product. So it's not just in the design and development stage, but also during the placement on the market, where manufacturers need to continue basically monitoring the product and making sure that it is still secure. So in cybersecurity, we talk about vulnerability handling, and one of the requirements that the CRA has is asks manufacturers to actually provide software updates and security updates free of charge when the products are on the market. So now, like most of these EU product legislations, the CRA will be underpinned by harmonized standards. Of course, standards remain voluntary, but they are a very useful way for manufacturers to comply, especially when fully harmonized means they provide the legal presumption of conformity. And then, in general, these are things that are also going to be referenced into the standards, is the idea that the CRA is risk-based. So that applies both to the conformity assessment classes, but also in general to the implementation of the essential requirements themselves. Finally, the CRA includes certain elements that are common in cybersecurity legislation, namely the idea of reporting obligations covering both actively exploited vulnerabilities and any severe cybersecurity incidents with large impact. So this also ties into other EU cybersecurity legislation, such as the NIS2 directive, which is also under implementation and transposition by the member states. And finally, like all the other NLF legislations, it relies on the market surveillance, which is a form of ex post enforcement. So products, by and large, are allowed to self-assess, except for the important and critical products, which are identified in the legislation. But on the other hand, there is market surveillance authorities from the member states that do the checking on the market of these products, that they really comply with the requirements of the legislation. So as I say, in scope, is products with digital elements. The CRA has quite a broad scope. So again, covering both hardware and software products. And that includes the remote data processing solutions of the so-called smart products. So that's actually covers a very large part of the supply chain. And I think that that's where the CRA becomes very interesting. And also, again, this has an impact on the standards, because we need to understand that when we are developing standards for the CRA, we are also developing the infrastructure that will allow the supply chain to communicate across each of its stages. So it starts from microchips all the way up to large hardware products, or of course libraries into the other software products that will contain them. So again, very much this communication, not just from manufacturers to the end user, but also manufacturers or developers with whoever is going to integrate their product as a component for the next product down the line. And of course, there's also some exclusions from scope, so this is quite important. Non-commercial products are excluded, so this applies in particular to open source products. There's also services in general, when they are purely web-based offerings, websites exclusively are also excluded from scope. But of course, I wanted to differentiate this software as a service that is a purely web-based offering from a software as a service that is provided in association with a product with digital elements. In that case, it is a remote data processing solution and therefore is in scope. And then there's also some important sectoral exclusions coming from different sectoral legislation that already has cybersecurity provisions. So that would apply to automotive, medical devices, aeronautic, or marine equipment. And here on this slide, you have basically a representation of the obligations of manufacturers. So in general, the manufacturer has to start with a risk assessment where they declare the intended purpose, the reasonably foreseeable use, and that's what starts their compliance process, right? Then based on that, they define the essential requirements that would apply. They do the relevant conformity assessment, and once they place the product on the market, they have to do general maintenance, meaning in this case, vulnerability handling and the reporting obligations. And then I think important to note that even after the product is expected to be in use, meaning at the end of the product lifetime, manufacturers will need to continue reporting any actively exploited vulnerabilities or cybersecurity incidents that occur related to that product. So I also mentioned that there's a risk-based approach and that there's a risk categorization specifically in the conformity assessment classes. And I want to, again, differentiate this from the general risk-based approach for the essential requirements. So you might have the essential requirement for access control, which means that this could be implemented in a variety of different ways. You might have no password, you might have a 4-digit PIN code, a 9-digit password, or a 2-factor authentication. And these were the 4 different levels of protection, and therefore this would be a kind of risk-based approach for the implementation of this essential requirement. On this slide, what we have are classes of the conformity assessment. So as I explained, most products fall in the default category and they are allowed to self-assess. But then there's a category of important products which there's actually two classes of within the important products. These are products that are particularly important in terms of the ICT supply chain, and here they would either need to apply standards or they would need to go through third-party assessment. Finally, you have the critical products, which essentially are like the important products, but what differentiates them is that they in future may be subject to mandatory certification. So cybersecurity certification comes from the Cybersecurity Act and from a slightly different tradition. In essence, what we're going to do for the beginning is treat these as important products, and they would be subject to the standards. And of course, there would be a productive dialogue between the harmonized standards and existing protection profiles and cybersecurity certification schemes. Finally, there's also a notion of attestation for open source products, where this would be subject to a commission empowerment to define exactly a program for security attestation for open source, but they would then subsequently be allowed to self-assess under such an attestation program. So, with this to say, the CRA has entered into force in December 2024, and that means that the transition period has started. That's a 36-month transition period, so we have 3 years before the obligations finally kick in for manufacturers in terms of the design and development requirements. And so I wanted to give you a picture of kind of how we are treating this and what actions we already have. So CRA implementation is already underway. In fact, the harmonized standards, we started engaging with the standardizers almost 2 years. Sorry? Okay, so we started engaging with the standardizers almost 2 years ago. And in fact, 2 or 3 weeks ago, the standardization request has been adopted by the Commission and notified to the ESOs. We have heard preliminary rumors that the votes of the national standards bodies would be positive for the acceptance. And so we're now expecting a letter from the ESOs which would either confirm an acceptance or not of the standardization request. So there's more information on the standards down the road, but I just wanted to give you an overview. So there's a number of other implementing and delegated acts that the Commission has to undertake as part of this legislation. So the first basically come or the priority is defined by the date at which we need to produce these. So there's a technical descriptions of the important and critical products. This needs to be ready by the end of the year, and we hope to come out with a public consultation relatively soon, so hopefully already next month. There will also be an act on the terms and conditions for national CSIRTs to withhold notifications. This, of course, is important because when there is a known vulnerability, we want to make sure that we are not increasing the impact of that by making it public before a patch is available, for instance. And then finally, there is the single reporting platform, which the CRA sets out by law, which is what will underpin the reporting obligations. This will be managed by ENISA, and it needs to be operational by 2026 when the reporting obligations kick in. Continuing, there's also a number of guidance topics that the legislation requests the Commission to provide guidance on. So these would cover at least the remote data processing solutions, the scope of open source obligations, how to define the support period and the product lifetime, to clarify a little bit topics of interplay with other union legislation. This could be either the Radio Equipment Directive, or it could be the AI Act, the machinery regulation, a lot of these regulations that you may know about. Some other topics could also be the definition of a substantial modification. Furthermore, also there's some provisions in the CRA that specifically target SMEs and how to facilitate life for SMEs. And so we also might be looking to provide guidance on that. In the meantime, we also want to be working and supporting the member states as they set up their notifying authorities and as they nominate their market surveillance authorities. So this is going to be very important for the actual enforcement, which happens at member state level. And then finally, there's also this CRA expert group that is basically meant to provide advice to the Commission. It's only one forum for involvement, but it's a useful one, and it will allow us to have a kind of structured discussion with a broad group of stakeholders. The first meeting was held a couple of weeks ago on the 12th of February. We were happy with the outcomes of this first group. There's a variety of participants and the discussion has been constructive. So looking forward to starting different work strands and moving forward with conversations within the expert group. Also, just a quick focus on the SME support. So the SME support measures in Article 33 include awareness raising and the support for testing and conformity assessment activities. Also, the notion of regulatory sandboxes. And then finally, there's also this notion of simplified technical documentation. There's a specific empowerment in the legislation for that. So we will also be trying to have a discussion about what this simplified technical documentation can look like in order to support SMEs. And there's also, I think, always important to mention in the EU funding programs, in particular the Digital Europe program, that has specific calls for support to SMEs in their digital transformation and the compliance transformation needed to support the CRA. Finally, we come to standardization. So, as I said, the standardization request for harmonized standards has been adopted by the Commission and notified to the ESOs. The most important point is that there are a lot of standards out there, in both international and European standards, and this standardization request aims to build on those standards. It does this by proposing a two-tiered approach. So it has both horizontal and vertical standards. And the idea is that the horizontal standards can give a kind of framework, whereas the vertical standards would be product specific and could actually achieve presumption of conformity for a more restricted scope. Because to have presumption of conformity, what you need is to identify threats and propose mitigations. Therefore, it's much easier to do that for a given product, for a given use case. So there needs to be some structure to this work so that standards can actually cover identifiable threats and propose identifiable mitigations. There needs to be kind of specific information provided to manufacturers, guiding them on the compliance to the CRA. That is what can allow a standard to give presumption of conformity. Then in terms of which product categories are being prioritized for these vertical standards, that really covers the important and the critical products. So the CRA Annex 3 and 4, as I described earlier. And of course, these are prioritized not only because they are important and critical, but also pure and simply because these are the products that would otherwise need to go to a notified body, meaning to third-party conformity assessment. And if, especially important class 1 products, if they can have a standard, then they can self-assess. For the products important class 2 or critical that would always need to go to a third party, having a harmonized standard can really facilitate the discussions with notified bodies. And so we're really prioritizing these standards right now, but it's not meant to be the end of the story. So really we see this as a kind of medium-term vision, that these are just the first building blocks of a new ecosystem of product security standards, similar to what's been done for machine safety over the last few decades, that we would also be kind of coming out with new standardization requests in time, covering new product categories. So here a quick description of the deliverables that are requested. So essentially the horizontal standards covering the essential requirements of the CRA and the vertical standards covering the different product categories in the important and critical product classes. And finally, a visual representation of what this all looks like as a kind of pyramid, the type A standard serving as the main framework, the type B standard serving as product agnostic descriptions of different individual essential requirements. So both the technical measures on the products and the vulnerability handling. And then at the bottom of the pyramid, you have the type C standards, so the product specific standards that would aim to provide full presumption of conformity for a given product type. You see the dates as well in the boxes, and the gray bar to the right showing the possibility of additional standardization requests in the future that would cover additional product categories. I think that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Filipe. That was great. Absolutely packed with information as ever, and really showing the transformative nature of the Cyber Resilience Act and the impact it'll have, across different sectors and also internationally as well. So I see there's one question from Ole Johansson in the chat. And the question is, the first proposal of the Cyber Resilience Act when the Commission separated existing products from the new products and allowed selling existing products after the 3-year implementation time, provided there was no substantial changes. Does this still apply?
So I think, just to be clear, the proposal is the same as the legislation in that, so the legislation only applies to products placed on the market after the entry into application, so after the end of the transition period. This does not change. Of course, products that are placed on the market subsequently to the entry into application need to comply with the CRA. Products that were placed on the market before that date, they don't need to comply with the CRA. That's what it means that the CRA is not yet in application. So that is super clear. What happens, and this again is true both in the proposal and in the legislation, is that if you have placed a product on the market before the entry into application and you are just doing its general maintenance, but there's no substantial modification, then in that case, the CRA continues to not apply because it was not in application when you first placed the product on the market. If, however, you carry out a substantial modification on the product after the entry into application, then the CRA starts to apply. And so this would be the general rule that will also apply to all products placed after the entry into application. So this understanding does not change from the proposal to the legislation.
That's great. Thank you, Filipe. Are you able to stay on? Because there's a few questions in the Q&A chat.
Yes, no problem.
Thank you very much. And then we've got 10 minutes at the end where we can get through them. I see there's a question about one of the slides. We'll be publishing the slides now, basically. So if you go to the event page, we'll have them up. Filipe's slides up very, very shortly. So Filipe, thank you very much. I'd like to hand the baton over to Lucia. So we've talked about the Cyber Resilience Act and the Standardisation Request, what this means. So now we turn to Lucia, who can give an overview of how these will be, well, from a European Standardisation Organisation, how the harmonised standards can be created. So Filipe, if you could stop sharing, and Lucia, I'll hand over to you. Lucia is a project manager at CEN-CENELEC, and she's also part of the CyberSTAND and STAN4CR project. Over to you, Lucia.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'm planning to give you an overview on, maybe you have new people in the audience who are not involved in standardization, so it will be a quick overview, and also to show you from the pyramid that Filipe showed us with the different deliverables, where we are working on those deliverables at CEN-CENELEC, and that will give you also an idea of what are the work that we are needing in standardization, and also a little bit of the timelines we will see as well at the end of the presentations when we are expected to deliver all of the standards. So first of all, for the new people in the audience, who we are, CEN-CENELEC are 2 out of the 3 European standards organizations, the ESOs, and we are officially recognized as standards organizations. So I'm here representing CEN-CENELEC, but also for the CRA standards, we will work with ETSI as well, so that you are aware. CEN-CENELEC, we have 34 countries and members in those countries. So as you can see, it's a number of each logo represents one of our organizations in the national parties, and actually everyone who wants to join the standardization work can join as an expert in each of in one of the national bodies or national committees that you see here on the screen. And that's how we work. Actually, we are based on the national delegation principle, representing a consensus. Of course, standards are voluntary, so this is not a mandatory thing that we do, and we are constantly in dialogue with the national bodies to try to have the consensus represented view of everyone. And of course, we're in dialogue with the Commission when we come to the work on harmonized standards. And this is something very important, and I have at the end here, my last bullet point is like, once we have one standard that is a European standard, then there is a standstill rule, meaning that any national standards will be replaced by this one European standard that is being developed. And this is very important for the European single market, of course. So this is a system that is really valuing consensus and the fact that we have this one standard for all of the members. How is the work organized? So imagine if you were to join via a national body. So you would be assigned to a technical committee to the topic that you're interested in. In this case, could be any of the topics related to the cybersecurity. And each technical committee has working groups, and this is really where the drafting is happening. And within different topics, we have the corresponding experts, and how we make the standards. So, well, in those working groups, we start with a proposal, then we proceed with the drafting. We have certain templates, and we try to fill in everything with the proposal. Then we launch this to a public inquiry where anyone can provide comments to the standards. We consider the comments. Finally, we approve the standard and we publish it. This is a really simplified timeline, but this is for you to know that there are different stages, and each of these stages has different time frames that we have to follow. And but basically, this is a procedure. And now when we talk about the CRA standards, so now you know how we work. We work in technical committees, in working groups. Who can join is via the national bodies, and we have different procedures to follow. And now when we talk about the deliverables for the cybersecurity standardization request, the CRA standardization request, we have been discussing for a time now where we can allocate the different deliverables within existing technical committees at CEN-CENELEC, but also at ETSI. So you saw a little bit of this in the previous slides from Filipe, and here we have the category A, that what you saw at the top of the pyramid. These are only allocated to CEN-CENELEC. So if you're interested in working on this deliverable, is at CEN-CENELEC, in particular the JTC 13. We will have a little bit of overview later on what is each of the technical committees that we have identified. And for the category B, they have been also assigned to CEN-CENELEC only. And again, for this JTC working group 9. And for the category C, there are two kinds of products that say the critical products only for CEN-CENELEC. This is only 3 lines. And all of the rest, out of the 41 topics, between the 16 and 38 is for CEN-CENELEC, also an ETSI. So I want to show you now in the next coming slides how we are distributing some of the work between CEN and CENELEC, but please know that there are also other items that I'm not going to cover today that will be happening at ETSI. So some deliverables and developments will happen at ETSI technical committees. So what you don't see in my slide doesn't mean that we are not going to work on that, but maybe just out of scope for CEN and CENELEC, or not yet completely defined. So here, just for you to remember, there are still some ongoing exchanges, and we will collaborate within the ISOs, and we will submit a joint program to fulfill with the Article 3 of the standardization request. But most importantly, what we have identified is where to do the horizontal work. This is at the JTC working group, and JTC 13 working group 9, special working group on cyber resilience acts, where there will be these three very important blocks that they are already being developed. And here, would you like to join the work via any of the projects that we have here, or in maybe via your national bodies, or you're already taking part and you would like to be nominated as an expert for these topics? This is one of the JTCs that we have specially dedicated for the CRA. And we also have here for some of the lines, so in particular for the line 16 of standardization request and line 39, the work will be happening at the CEN-TC 224. And here, when you receive the slides, you will be able to click on the link to go to the CEN-CENELEC website and read a little bit more of the TC. And again, we will have in general a lot of the work will be based on the work of the CENELEC TC 65X. Oh, sorry, I clicked by accident on the link, I hope. And finally, for example, for the line 40, we will be working at the working group 6 of the JTC 13. And I leave you here as well an overview of many deliverables that will be carried out at the CENELEC TC 47X. So the main objective of us sharing this information is that these are very interesting topics, and we are just starting now with the work. Actually, we are progressing at high speed, and we do need the experts. So should you be interested in any of these topics, so this is a good overview of where you can find the technical committee at CEN and CENELEC. As I told you before, any topics that are not here, maybe not yet defined, or maybe at ETSI. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to me via email. And finally, I'm sharing here as an important slide because it's the timeline we have. If we want to be really ready to support the manufacturers by the entry into application, we really have to be ready with the standards by October 2026, so that the manufacturers will have 1 year of time to adapt to have the standards already available. And for that, it's important that all of the heavy drafting is happening already today. So here is where we have to deliver the work program. Then there will be already an advanced draft expected between April and the summer. There will be a lot of external stakeholder consultations, and for that we will have one of the colleagues today later in this webinar announcing one of those stakeholder consultations and events, because we do want to incorporate different views from maybe other stakeholders that are not usually involved in standardization, so stay tuned for that as well. And, oops, sorry. And this is for you to know that maybe around October, and this is a very generic timeline because I'm talking about 41 deliverables, so each deliverable has their own little timeline. But this is high level, let's say more or less by October, the big drafting should be already done. So and dispatched to the inquiry, and the inquiry, if you remember, it was one of the processes that I showed at the beginning, where we will receive comments and we will adapt our draft, and finally, after we have edited and included all of the comments when relevant and possible, we will finalize a draft and be ready for publication. There are 2 deliverables that are expected to be a little bit before in August, so we are trying to do those at a little bit of higher speed. So for today, the most important for me is to transmit to you who we are, how can you join us, where are we working, and in what topics we are developing right now, and what is the timeline, and also about the stakeholder consultations, because those are entry points for feedback, and we're looking really for experts, we're looking for support. So thank you for having me here, Nick, and colleagues, and I'm available for any question.
Thank you, Lucia. I'll just very quickly ask, there's a couple of questions in the chat. I'll just pick one, then we can come to them later as well. There's a question about how to engage with CEN-CENELEC, for example, which I think maybe you can answer in the chat. There's also a question, what working group would be best to focus on? That's quite an open question as well. We'll have time at the end. I don't know if you want to quickly say a word, or
I have time at the end, or I can answer now, whatever is best for the flow of the webinar.
I'll tell you what, if we can keep it to the end, then or you can also see in the chat as well in the Q&A box and answer directly.
Excellent.
Thanks, Lucia. Thank you very much. I'll hand over now to sort of all of these procedures, all of these processes, all of these opportunities to contribute to the development of the standards, and the dialogue around it are very important for the Cyber Resilience Act. So if we focus deeply more into the horizontal standards, Berit Adel, who's senior consultant at the Danish Standards Organisation, is going to take us through some of the steps which are taking place in this area. So over to you, Berit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. I hope you can see my screen, everybody.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, good. My name is Berit Ådahl, and I am from Danish Standards. On a daily basis, I'm responsible for the Danish Mirror Committee, taking part in the standardization of in Cyber Resilience Act and other cybersecurity standards. But today I'm talking in the capacity for the STAN4CR project. As Lucia mentioned, this is part of the stakeholder engagement project. So I'm here to tell you about a workshop that we are hosting on 8 April 2025. It's going to take place in Copenhagen, and you can also join the workshop online. So this workshop is part of this STAN4CR project, which is funded by HSboosyter. And the goal is to raise public awareness and actively involve key stakeholders in the standardization process. So we work very close together with the CCMC. So the main focus of this workshop is to address lines 1 and 15 in the standardization request, which are the horizontal standards, or some of the horizontal standards. So one of the standardization one of the lines is the one with the life cycle of the product life cycle, and then the other one is on the vulnerability handling. So the main objective of our workshop is to present the preliminary content of the horizontal standards being developed to comply with lines 1 and 15 in the standardization request, and then to receive feedback and input from stakeholders that are going to comply with the Cyber Resilience Act. So engaging stakeholders in this process. So the target group of the workshop is manufacturers and distributors of products with digital elements that are covered by the CRA. So we hope that these stakeholders will participate in this workshop so we can make these standards even better. And the reason for you to participate is for you to have a unique platform to influence the development of the standards and to share all your experience and insights to shape the future of these standards. Just a brief overview of the agenda for the day. This is going to be a workshop. We will also have an introduction to the Cyber Resilience Act, as today we'll have the Commission to do this introduction. We will also have a short introduction to the standardization in general. And then we will go into the workshop mode, where we will have 2 rounds. We will have one round addressing the Principles for Cyber Resilience Act, Principles for Cyber Resilience, which is the line 1. And then we will have a workshop dedicated to vulnerability handling. And we are still in processing on how to manage the workshops, but it will be presenting some of the work that they have carried out in JCC 13 Working Group 9 already. And then we will have discussions in groups. It will be both on-site in Copenhagen, and of course, you can also participate online in group discussions. And then to round up the day, we'll have a case presentation from a company working with the going to comply with this Cyber Resilience Act, just to get inspired. Then we will have next steps for the standardization development as well. So just for you to have all the details, this is going to be very soon, 8 April in Copenhagen at the Tivoli Hotel. You can also participate online. Registration is required, and there's a link where you can read more about the workshop and where you can sign up. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. And then I can say that this stakeholder engagement workshop in Copenhagen is just one of 3 workshops. There are going to be a similar workshop in Spain later this year, and then we're going to have a 3rd workshop in Cyprus. Also, I believe it's in the end of the year. So that was all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Berit. That was great. So yes, so these events and webinars and events are are there for dialogue and for people to contribute to. So these are opportunities where you can attend in person or also online. So these are very open. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Berit. So one way in which you can contribute to the standards is by applying to CyberSTAND, of course, where we have an open call where you can apply for funding to contribute to the standards. That can include participation at meetings such as those, and also the creation of documentation, etc. So I'll have a slide on that later towards the end of the webinar. So thank you to that. And if you're confused about, all of these procedures and how to get involved, then I'll also highlight the training academy which we have on the HSboosyter project, which has good explainers on the European Standardisation Organisations and systems and how you can get involved and join. So with that, let's speak to somebody who has benefited and is now contributing to the standardisation through the funding of CyberSTAND. So I'll hand over to Maria Rafael from Rafael Legal, and she can tell us about the work that she's carrying out now. Here we are.
Hello,
Rafael,
everyone. I hope that you can hear me and that now you can see me.
Yes,
well.
We can see you. Yeah, we can see you. Can you put your presentation in full screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
How is it
That's
now?
great. That's great.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
So I hope that I will be in a position to also shed some light about Cyber Resilience Acts and the ongoing standardization efforts for the development of horizontal and vertical standards. The Cyber Resilience Act is basically a market placement legislation primarily, but not only, because it also provides for obligations that they need to be fulfilled even after market placement. The scope of the products is huge. It encompasses all products with digital elements, hardware and software, including components and remote data processing solutions. The Commission classifies the different products under the CRA mainly for conformity assessment purposes. So if your product belongs into the important and critical category, there are different conformity assessment paths that you may follow in comparison to whether to the scenario where your product does not belong under any of those categories, in which case you can simply proceed with a self-declaration of conformity. And of course, you may also use harmonized standards optionally, or even go to a notified body for conformity purposes. If your product is an important product class 1, there are various options available. You can use harmonized standards and for presumption of conformity purposes as well. If they're not available, common specifications. If we fail to develop citable harmonized standards, then the European Commission has the freedom to develop their own specifications. There could be an ENISA cybersecurity certification scheme available if it is deemed by a secondary act by the European Commission that it can be used for conformity purposes, and you can also go to a notified body. For important products class 2 and the critical products in the two last annexes, the options for conformity assessment purposes are more limited, except if there is an ENISA scheme that it is considered suitable for conformity purposes. Then if your product is important class 2 product, then you can use the CSA scheme. And if it is a critical product and there is such scheme available, then you are required to use a CSA scheme, or else you have to follow any of the other modules, Module B and C and Module H. At this moment, the classification of the products is provided in the law itself, but the Commission also has the power to remove and add products within the different annexes and the list. So the list may very well change. At the moment, the critical products that receive different treatment and necessarily need to go to a notified body or use a cybersecurity scheme are the hardware devices with security boxes, smart meter gateways within smart metering systems, and smart cards or similar devices. So, in order to be able to place your products into the market, what are the conditions? The first condition is that you have to demonstrate, this is an essential requirement as well, that you have developed and produced a product of digital element in a way that they ensure an appropriate level of cybersecurity based on the risk, and you should be able to show that you have done this effectively. There is a list of cybersecurity controls in Annex 1, Part 1, 2 of the CRA that, depending on the outcome of the risk assessment, you must implement for conformity assessment purposes. However, this does not mean, and this is my interpretation and my understanding, that you taking and implementing the cybersecurity controls that are applicable to your specific products, that the manufacturer's work stops there. It may be that that you may need to take more security controls to mitigate the risks that exist and arise out of your risk assessment. Of course, the products must be installed and used for their intended purpose under conditions which can be reasonably foreseen, and where applicable, the necessary security updates must have been installed. But also, following market placement, you need to comply with specific vulnerability handling requirements. And just an example will be, you need to be able to document the components and vulnerabilities of your product, and also have in place an SBOM, a software bill of materials, documenting the different components of your product. So, as we have described, on the basis of the risk assessment, you need to take several security measures and need to comply with specific essential requirements to be able to place your product into the European market. The outcome of this assessment should be taken into account during the planning, design, development, production, and maintenance of your product throughout the product's life cycle. Now, the PT1, which is under JTC 13 Working Group 9, and I am a member in and one of the editors, we have been tasked to provide and prepare the specifications for the design, production, and development of the products in a way that it is appropriate to the cybersecurity risks. And this diagram in front of you, I have made it purposefully circular because it is a reiterative process. It needs to be, the risk assessment process needs to be continuously and systematically updated during the support period of your product, which will be determined by the manufacturer under specific criteria, but it cannot be less than 5 years. So first you identify your risk. You need to conduct a risk analysis based on the legal criteria, the intended purpose, the reasonably foreseeable use, the conditions of use. You need to determine, based on your risk assessment, which are the security controls that can be applied to you out of the list of those controls in the Annex 2.2.14, then determine how you will implement those requirements that are applicable to you. From the outset, from the design of the product, you also need to have a plan about how to apply vulnerability handling requirements following placement on the market, but also a distinct obligation during the risk assessment process is to be able to produce, design, and develop the product in a proportionate to the risk manner. This means, in my interpretation, that you may need to take more controls than the ones envisioned by the CRA itself. The risk assessment also includes due diligence obligations in relation to third-party components. So in PT1, we're providing the specifications for the risk assessment process that all the manufacturers need to comply with before placing products into the market. But also, these risk assessment specifications need to be applied by all other standards that will be prepared within the standardization system. So it is expected that the vertical standards that will be developed for important and critical products, and they are intended to provide presumption of conformity, they are expected that they will align with the PT1 standard in relation to the risk assessment process, and that they will follow also the high-level cybersecurity principles that we will develop in order for the products to follow throughout the product's life cycle. And remember, this is a shall requirement in the standardization request. The verticals really are required to align with the PT1 standard, or else they may risk citation and presumption of conformity. However, the verticals, despite that the PT1 standard will provide a general framework for risk assessment specifications, principles, etc., they need to implement and further develop the horizontal standards. They can also take informative guidance and take reference from the standard that will be developed under PT2, which will provide some common security requirements that are attached to specific use cases and specific threat categories, and ensure that they prepare standards that correspond to specific security levels, if possible, risk levels, and specific threats. So there is a dependency relationship between the different standards that will be developed, horizontal and verticals, and the role undertaken by PT1 is very important, because it really sets the foundation upon which the development of other standards will rely on. So, of course, we need to clarify that PT1 standard itself is not intended for presumption of conformity, but it will support the development of granular vertical standards for presumption of conformity purposes. Therefore, PT1 standard shall meet the standardization request requirements, because if it does not, then the citation of the vertical standards, which will rely on the PT1 standard, will be subject to challenge. The PT1 standard can also be used to support internal control, Module A for self-assessment, that could lead to declaration of conformity for the default category of products, those products not classified as important or critical. So it is repeatedly stated that only vertical standards can provide presumption of conformity. Of course, for those product categories that can be used for presumption of conformity purposes. Important class 2 and critical products are not one of those products that can provide presumption of conformity, but still it is intended that those standards will be able to support the third-party conformity assessment process. And for the default category that no standards, other standards at the moment exist, they can rely to a certain extent, subject to their own risk assessment process, to the horizontal standards, PT1 standard and PT2 standard, in order to be able to support their self-assessment purpose. Again, we need to clarify that only vertical standards are the ones that can determine which specific standards apply to specific product categories, but they cannot do so without first ensuring that they need to align with the PT1 standards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria. That was fantastic. Really good detail on the vertical and on vertical standards in particular. So great. I hope nobody minds, but if we extend the webinar just by 5 minutes, because there's a lot of questions coming in, and I wanted to ask the panelists if there were any questions which in particular stood out for them and they wanted to highlight. I see that Filipe, you've been very busy answering. Lucia has too. So I think a lot of the questions were around your presentation. So I wondered if there was any of the points that you've given and the answers that you wanted to just highlight. Maybe Filipe, we could start with you.
Hi, Nick. No, I just wanted to thank everyone for the good questions, and I hope that the answers in the chat clarify. Thanks.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. And then Lucia, was there anything that stuck out for you that you wanted to highlight?
Thank you, Nick. There was one question, how we can join the different technical committees. I'm actually making a hybrid question here. How can we join the technical committees, which one to join, and what are the costs for joining? So basically, when you take a look at our slides, by any of the presented slides, you will be able to identify, at least for CEN-CENELEC, what are the technical committees that are being involved and which topics are going to be developed in each technical committee. So if your expertise fits any of the technical committees and the standard that we're going to be developing, that's where you should participate. We encourage that. And for joining, each of the NSBs, the national standardization bodies, have their own fee, but also CyberSTAND has as part of the project, if you apply and you're selected, you're able to cover the costs as well as part of the grant that you receive for the CyberSTAND. Nick, I give back to you in case you want to complement.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So you can cover the fees associated with the national standards bodies can be covered. You make your application and you include that in the estimate for the funding that you'd like to receive for the work you're going to be carrying out. So you can claim those fees back, and I put more details in under that question too. I don't know if Maria or Berit, if there was any questions you wanted to pick up on. Maybe Berit first.
I believe there were no questions regarding the workshop, okay. But please reach out if there are any. I put the link for the workshop in the chat as well. So. Thank you. And of course, if you're, as I said, if you're interested in attending that and you want to contribute, then, this would be an eligible thing you could apply for through CyberSTAND. Okay, so it could be covered. We have evaluators who check everything, but if it's seen as a good application, then it could be accepted. And finally, thank you, Berit. And then finally, Maria, if there was anything you saw that you wanted to.
Questions for me either. I don't know how should I interpret this. No questions for me.
Okay, no problem, no problem. That's fine. So I'd like to really thank all of our speakers, and I'd like to just highlight a couple of things before I do thank everybody. If my screen is coming up. Okay, so first of all, I mentioned earlier, if this is new to you, you haven't contributed to standards, you're not sure about the landscape, etc., then you should have a look at the training academy, the Standardisation Training Academy, which is part on the HSboosyter website. Now here, there's lots of information about the European Standards Organisations. There's information about how to participate in a technical committee or a working group, how standards are developed in Europe and also internationally, and just generally lots of information about standardization in general. There's also a lot of material which is provided by CEN-CENELEC and also ETSI. So do have a look at this, because this is an interesting area to get involved with. As I mentioned, CyberSTAND provides funding for people to contribute directly into, especially in this phase of drafting in consensus on the horizontal standards. We're very interested in funding, people who perhaps aren't currently involved. Okay, so if you're a domain expert, you have knowledge in this field, but you don't already contribute to standards, then you can apply for this. Okay, we're also interested in engaging with SMEs and the open source contributors as well. So this is funding which is available to all European citizens and residents. Another question about the expert group at the Commission, which is looking at the Cyber Resilience Act. In CyberSTAND, we also have a community as well, and this acts as a kind of the middle layer of a sandwich between the standardization working groups and technical committees and the EC's high-level expert group. So here we encourage dialogue and the group acts to raise awareness of the Cyber Resilience Act and its implications as well. So again, we look to involve many of the people who are perhaps not at the table at the moment here. And then in terms of upcoming events, well, we have the final event of HSboosyter, which is taking place in Brussels next week. Registration for that closes today, so please do register if you're interested in coming. There are a number of these events which have been highlighted today around the Cyber Resilience Act, including the webinars and deep dive sessions on the semiconductors, the horizontal standards event in Copenhagen in April, and also of course the Cybersecurity Standardisation Conference on the 20th of March in Brussels. And then our final event through HSboosyter takes place on the 21st of March on a different topic, but a relevant topic to on standards in innovation and data spaces. So with that, I'd like to thank all of our speakers for joining us and making this this webinar happen. We had over 100 registrations, so it's been great, and I know a lot of you have stayed on right to the end. There are questions that I think all of the questions have been answered near enough, and if there are ones still open, then we'll look to get back to you on that. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone, and have a lovely day.